Thank you very much, Dorcas, for that gracious introduction. It is a delight to be with all of you again, and I feel, in keeping with Dorcas' opening words, as though I'm home again, or that I have arrived. And I felt that way the very first day that I came to the Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island. I have obligations that keep me away many Sundays, which is also my loss. Life is like that. But believe me, I share, I honor, and affirm the values for which this society stands: ethical deed before creed, and the wonderful ways in which various of you in various manners carry out the principles that inform ethical humanism. A great delight to be back. When I was in the 7th grade studying world history, we were assigned a paperback book on Hannibal. Not Hannibal Lecter, whom the president-elect, difficult as it is for me to say those words, referenced a few times during the recent campaign, but Hannibal, the brilliant general who waged the Second Punic War against the Roman Republic in the 3rd century before the Common Era, apparently bringing attack elephants over the snowbound Alps to do so. But I don't remember too much of what was written in that book. What I do remember distinctly is that a page had been torn out of it. And my first thought is that a student had accidentally ripped it, failed to tape that page back in, or maybe the book was too close to that student's 3-year-old brother or sister. But instead, the page was torn out by orders of the school. What was written on it was deemed inappropriate, maybe dangerous for us to read. Something like page 173. So, of course, one of my classmates wasted no time going to a bookstore to read that page, and he told me, what a disappointment. Wasn't anything on it. Apparently it involved a conversation between a man and a woman. Possibly they were in bed. So for that reason, 30 books were damaged by orders of the school. That kind of action has morphed in recent years, as most or all of you know, into entire books being removed from the shelves of school libraries and public libraries. During the 23-24 school year, that's extending into this calendar year, PEN America, an organization founded over a century ago to support writers, found that book bans have nearly tripled from the year before. This past year, 10,000 books were removed from school libraries and public libraries. As I said in the online newsletter from Ethical Humanist Society this past week, when I looked at a list of a sampling of the books that had been banned, my first reaction was it was an assigned reading list for a high school English class, except for one of them. One of them was very appropriate for an elementary school. Here are the books, and I'll let you decide if you agree. To Kill a Mockingbird, Huckleberry Finn, Of Mice and Men, Beloved by Toni Morrison, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, 1984, Charlotte's Web. Now, by the way, Charlotte's Web author E.B. White has written a masterful book about democracy, which is on many of our minds, particularly as we look at the threats to it. Charlotte's Web was banned because animals talk to each other like people. Now, I don't know if, therefore, the Three Pigs should also be banned. And then finally, Anne Frank, Diary of a Young Girl. These are only some of them, of course. I think they're among the most important literary works of the last 150 years. And not to be acquainted with them would qualify as a major gap in someone's education, in my view. And I also wondered what books are permitted. Censorship has as long a history as written language itself, it seems. The ancient Chinese Emperor Shi Huangdi began getting rid of historical texts in ancient China in 259 before the Common Era, because he wanted history to begin with him. And a little bit later, the Roman Emperor Caligula banned the Odyssey by Homer because it too conspicuously celebrated ideals of Greek freedom. Shakespeare was also censored, even though Shakespeare meticulously tried to keep on the good side of Queen Elizabeth and later King James I. King James, who the King James Version of the Bible is named after. In fact, with King James, Shakespeare specifically wanted to include in the play Macbeth Banquo, because James could trace his genealogy back to Banquo, or so he believed. But Queen Elizabeth, when she discovered that Shakespeare's play Richard II, not a particularly famous play, included a scene in which a ruler was deposed and killed, ordered that it not be performed. It got presented anyway, and the individuals responsible for putting on the play were executed. Jumping ahead to 1933, young students in Germany, in May of that year, May 10th to be exact, marched in torchlight parades and threw 25,000 volumes of books into bonfires, un-German books. Hitler had been in power about 3 months by that point. Doing some math, some elementary school math. He came in February 1st. By the time that World War II ended, Nazi Germany had destroyed an estimated 100 million books. Fortunately, not the Diary of Anne Frank. And in our country, the Puritans of Plymouth, Massachusetts, the same ones we will celebrate in a week and a half, ones who came over on the Mayflower, offered the first known book banning in what became the United States. Apparently, a writer by the name of Thomas Morton wrote about how these Puritan settlers who had escaped religious persecution were just as willing to exercise persecution as those they were escaping. And he wrote a book that still exists, apparently, a few copies. There's one in the Library of Congress, of course, New England Canine. And William Bradford ordered this infamous and scurrilous book full of lies and slanders to be destroyed. I think that event is instructive for us because it is emblematic of a lot of the censorship that is taking place in the United States today. People do not want to read about, learn about, think about, or certainly teach their children about shameful or negative aspects of their histories. That is an all too human tendency. I am not exempt from it. In addition to being a fervent ethical humanist, I am a Unitarian Universalist minister, as Dorker pointed out in the introduction today, and I often proudly mention Unitarian and Universalist leaders who opposed slavery during the 18th and 19th century. People like Theodore Parker, who actually committed civil disobedience against the Fugitive Slave Act, hiding an African American in his office, or William Ellery Channing, or Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I'm less apt to mention that various Unitarian and Universalist ministers supported slavery. Many in this country don't want to hear about slavery at all, let alone teach our children about that subject. Or they want it portrayed as something benign and helpful. The slaves were our families. It was even a humanitarian gesture because, as the governor of Florida pointed out, African Americans were taught useful skills. At the same time, that same governor, Ron DeSantis, blocked an advanced placement course which featured writers like James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, and bell hooks. School curricula, he said, should never suggest that students should feel guilt for past actions committed by others of the same race. But that's nonsense. No curriculum of which I'm aware suggests that students now should feel responsible for or feel guilty about gross misdeeds of the past. At the same time, I would have to say with some appreciation, history for a niche audience has not been erased. Last February, I was on a guided cruise with Andrea along the Mississippi River. Most of the week was in Louisiana. One of the stops was a sugarcane plantation where a group of 10 of us sat in a slave hut, lodging designed for 12 people. And our guide was absolutely forthright about how horrendous the life of a sugarcane worker would be. During harvest seasons, slaves would work around the clock. It was painful and injurious work, such that workers typically couldn't last longer than 11 years at it. He also spoke of the daughter of the plantation family in the 1860s greeting a slave of that plantation at the well in the backyard. She asked him about a certain mark on his neck, and he said, "You didn't know? Runaways, when they get caught, get branded." So I asked the guide, how much of what you're telling us is taught in Louisiana public schools? And he smiled and basically answered, forget about it. Here's a question. The history of slavery in this country is gruesome. You only need see the movie 12 Years a Slave to realize that. And in fact, I was going to turn it off a number of times during the course of watching it. And there's only so much of something utterly awful that anyone, a child, an adult with any sense of humanity, can endure. So I would like to ask, particularly anyone with teaching experience, but any of you, how would you go about teaching about American slavery, or for that matter, about the Holocaust, knowing that class session after class session is going to be dealing with something utterly horrifying and would cause perhaps students to stay away or be glued to their iPhones or their laptops if they're permitted in the classroom? How do you rise to that challenge? But the alternative we've often selected, I believe, is worse. Not to teach people their history at all, or to teach a falsified or candied over history. So along with the short shrifting of history teaching has come something else, the curbing of the freedom to read. I've already mentioned about the books that have been removed from libraries around the country. Let's take a look at reading itself. I can't express my support of it more eloquently than the poem that Joan read by Emily Dickinson. Reading opens new worlds for people. It's a way, as the Native American expression has it, of walking in someone else's moccasins. Or, in the words of George M. Johnson, who is the author of the most frequently banned book in this country in the last 4 years, to his great credit, a book entitled All Boys Aren't Blue. Reading is a form of empathy. And I know empathy is a theme for this society this year. It is a way, he said, to understand and truly empathize with the experience of others, to hear their stories directly from them. George M. Johnson said, a book allows the voiceless to have a voice, and those reading it to have the words they need for their own healing and salvation. I just recently read George M. Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue, and it allows me to enter his world. It's his life story. It's very much like Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye, only it's different because this is a different person. George M. Johnson is Black, and as he calls himself, queer, constantly afraid as he was growing up of being rejected, afraid of being bullied, afraid of being alone. But it is a very affirming story of what caused him to survive and thrive, namely unconditional love from his parents, and very importantly, from his grandmother. His father was a police officer in New Jersey. His mother worked outside the home full-time. His grandmother really was the parent on duty day after day. And she said, when she learned about his sexual orientation, "I love you just the way you are." He was rewarded by life, and thank goodness for that. But I wonder why someone who has fear and loathing of a person they don't know can't be allowed the opportunity to see that this is a fine human being and hear his experiences, which are really quite vividly written and beautifully written in his book. Number of banned books, as you might imagine, pertain to sexuality and homosexuality. I want to talk about another one, and I figure that for a presentation like this one, I should bring books to the lectern. This is the next book that I wish to mention, And Tango Makes Three. It's a children's book, but until I ordered it, I didn't realize these are not pages. It's a book like Goodnight Moon. Every page is cardboard. And furthermore, it is age appropriate for a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. It's about two male penguins in Central Park Zoo who adopted and raised an orphan penguin chick named Tango. And it's based on a true story. It's intended to convey that family and caring and nurturance are possible by two male penguins. So about a year and a half ago, this book got removed from a library in a central school district in Florida near Orlando, along with about 30 other books. And in the spring of this year, 6 Florida students filed a suit along with their parents and along with the authors, the 2 authors of this book. One of those students was in the 1st grade. He was interested in the book because of his fascination with animals. Some of you may have seen the movie about penguins. Male penguins sit on the eggs of babies for long periods in Antarctica while their mothers are away. Well, the district said that based on Florida's parental rights and education law, otherwise known as Don't Say Gay, signed by the governor, this book would be a candidate for removal. And the authors, Peter Parnell and Justin Richardson, answered that they joined the suit to affirm the American principle that no child should be denied age-appropriate information in school because of the beliefs and biases of some, to defend students' right to read a heartwarming story of difference, acceptance, and love, and to protect authors from censorship rooted in intolerance. We are co-signatories to this suit. But it's the reactions of one of the students that I want especially to highlight. ZT is a 12-year-old, openly gay. According to the words that he wrote in the lawsuit, I'm drawn to this book because of its tolerant, kind-hearted, and family-friendly depiction of 2 parents of the same sex who raise an adopted child. This statement has personal meaning for me because there is a member of my family who is gay, who is worried because of the recent election, because of that document known as Project 2025, that her partner and she will be unable legally to adopt a child. She is seriously mentioning moving to Canada. So this example of censorship, among many others, points up to me something deeply disturbing underlying the banning of books. It's a reinforcement of hostility toward already marginalized groups, gay, Black, or trans. And the harassment that they face then becomes institutionalized and bolstered by authorities like school boards and political officials, parents of other children, and religious leaders. And believe me, this kind of persecution can lead to suicide among many young people. As to Tango Makes Three, there's some good news. As Margaret Mead said, never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. Owing to community pressure, this past September, 2 months ago, the school district in question restored And Tango Makes Three, along with the 36 other books, to their shelves. Yes. As they say, the recent spate of book banning in this country is part of a bigger social force that has been in place for some time. As people have done in the last days, various post-mortems, diagnoses, Monday morning quarterbackings about the recent election, they've mentioned the 45% of Hispanic voters who supported Donald Trump, the majority of white women who did so, the underperformance of younger voters for Kamala Harris. All of that is correct. But there is a mighty force behind the president-elect that is generally known as the Christian right, which encompasses Christian nationalists, so-called. Evangelical Christians in this country represent 1 out of every 4 voters, 36 million people, 80% of whom supported Donald Trump. And some of them sincerely believe that President-elect Trump is a counterpart to Jesus. It doesn't seem to be a problem for them that the president-elect is a serial sexual predator, an adversary of marginalized groups, a foul-mouthed pathological liar, and a supporter and fomenter of violence. I think Jesus, if he came back, would be a little bit puzzled by that comparison. Jesus, who sided allegedly with the poor and the persecuted, said that the person, whether in an accepted group or not, who helps the wounded stranger at the side of the road is doing divine work. The person who rushed to protect a prostitute who was being pelted with stones and stood between her and her attackers, who stood up for nonviolence, what a concept, might be a bit surprised at being identified with Donald Trump. More surprised than pleased. Be that as it may, much, if not all, of the Christian right believe that there is now a state of Armageddon. Those who support what might be called liberal values, but they're the values that inform our great democracy in this country, freedom of the press, respect for religious differences, gay rights, are utterly and hopelessly evil. And along with that, threats on people's lives, as you know, have shamefully become normalized in this country, whether aimed at elected officials or election workers, members of the press, Haitian Americans, whatever the despised group of the moment might be. For me, it took looking at another book, a book written by a librarian entitled That Librarian, Amanda Jones, to absorb the impact personally and viscerally that those threats have on a human being and that person's state of mind. Amanda Jones grew up in a small town in Louisiana, about 20 miles from Baton Rouge. She loved her little community, its fresh air, its big sky, a place where people could bicycle safely from one place to another, where swimming was possible in the nearby creek, where people cordially greeted one another by first name. And after she grew up, she became the school librarian at the middle school in that community. A couple of years ago, she made a statement at a local public library board meeting of opposition to censorship. I have a copy of her short speech for anyone who's interested. And if you read nothing else, reading that speech at the end of this book is well worth your time. And then wrap it up? Okay. Thank you, Dorcas. Well, I will ban some of my talk. Where are we? Well, only to say that that she too, after facing a text like, "You have a large target on your back, click, click, see you soon," along with others, she went into a hysterical crying fit that lasted months. And yet, again, thanks to the wisdom that Margaret Mead has offered us, she has been restored to her position at the library. Let me mention something very serious and then give us some words, some proclamations of hope. First, the serious matter. When she said her friends turned against her, this is Amanda Jones, I remembered the first presentation I ever heard from a Holocaust survivor, somebody who grew up in Poland, who told us what she couldn't understand to this day is that her classmates, her friends in school, overnight were against her and wanted her dead. So the potential for a crowd of people to become hostile, irrational, and deadly is a fearful and real thing. But the good news is that pushback can also be successful on behalf of liberty and justice for all. And I want to close by quoting our friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. In the halls of our United States Congress, as democracy gets infringed upon, let freedom ring. And in the halls of our schools and public libraries, let freedom ring. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dorcas.